Now there's one little thing I took in with me tonight, and this came through the little stories I was telling to the Ukrainians, people who are here, are friends, and they, even them, had time to make this little leprechaun that we're sitting down here to maybe take it.
Well, Lizzie brought his own drink, but I don't think Stephen might be too happy.
In the middle of a war going on in their country, had time to sit down and listening to all the fairy tales around Ardara. Now Barney Keeney reckons Ardara belongs to 13 fairy forts. Now we don't know where they all are. I asked his son and he doesn't know where they are. But Barney reckons that there was a fort in this town, and we always say it's up at the top of the town there, you know, Ardara. Now that might be right and might be wrong. And of course our big link with Darby O'Gill and the Little People. So, I'm sure everyone's seen the film in here, Darby O'Gill, and that's what linked myself and Keith up. Of course we're two tour guides and we're always searching for good stories, and Kevin has joined us and he's searching for good stories, and Michelle and the gang. So what I would like to do is to welcome him here to Ardara, to the town of the, as I say, the town of the fairies, and to do with Darby O'Gill and Jimmy O'Rourke, of course very famous, and maybe there will be wee stories about Jimmy and different things as we go on through the evening. So, and of course this very famous Bar Queen was dropping in. Right then, a wee clap, a quick clap for him.
You know, it's such a wonderful setting here, a magical setting. God, I thought Biddy's a Barnes this night was atmospheric, but I'll tell you, this is a wonderful space. When Colin started talking about the stables, I was thinking to myself, Jesus, will I take my overcoat to this here? I was thinking of an out-drafty door and a couple of big hay bales about the place. But oh my God, it's a magical setting, and I should have known that you were going to come up with such a lovely venue for it. Do you mind, folks, because I'm absolutely bowled over with the turnover, or the turnover, the turnover as well. The turnover and the turnout. So I was thinking maybe what would be a nice program, because you know I'm spending the next month now travelling around the county again one more time, but this is a sort of a celebration, because I'm not hunting down and chasing stories and legends and historically related phenomena now. This is a meeting and greeting. You know, this is the collection finished, and it's been a collection by the people for the people. I know that it took somebody to put it together, and to take these, what I hope are very, very important themes to this book, not just for us, but for future generations. I really feel that. I feel that in the future, the wheel will turn again. People ask me, well, what about, you know, what is the fairies, or what about the fairies? I think essentially, you know, the fairies are connected very much to a connectivity with that ancient heritage that we have, a connectivity with the ancestors, a connectivity with nature, a connectivity with that landscape around us, and this is what I hope comes out in a lot of these stories that I collected.
you're all probably wondering, thanks again for that there, why there's a spinning wheel. What has this to do with the fairylands and the fairy places? Well, I come from a long generation of weavers and spinners. And I suppose it's my passport around the world. I've travelled with the looms and the spinning wheels all over. The spinning wheel that I have here was made by a very famous spinning wheel maker, named she was from Ardara. It wasn't passed down from my grandmother or I went 40 years ago and bought it, and it was one of the best buys I ever got, because I was very intrigued with the way that a thread was made. So my little story dates back to my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, and my father, and we were Sweeneys, and we lived in a little place called Glendone, the Glen of the Fairies. Now there's a lot of stories you might hear tonight that translate back to Glendone, and I know up in the J School, the Overroad, they're doing a little project about Glendone. What I'm going to do is tell you, I was telling a little story about making up a thread. Do you all know how a thread is made? You see? Don't. And I only realised this, my good friend Michael over here, Michael Malloy, and we were out in the factory when we had visitors in, and then we had local people, our own local people, and I says to myself, this is drifting apart because it's been generations. I know there are people doing spinnings, but I'd be the 7th generation spinner, because I learned from my Aunt Diane, which was learnt by my grandmother, and then she learnt me, so I carried it on down. Like the fiddlers take their fiddles and their banjos and their tin whistles, I carry the spinning wheel with me. So the story of the spinning wheel, and I had a very famous character in one day with me there from the town, Dan Horn, and he moved to Glendone and was born and raised in a family of 17 in my home place where my grandfather and mother lived. And the story is, he was prospecting for gold in Glendone. Now, he was big into it, he was looking for gold. But I realised, I says to him, you don't have to prospect for gold at all. I says, well, there's gold on the hills looking at you. He says, I don't understand, what do you mean? So my story starts with the sheep on the hill. And of course, as you're all driving around and you just look up and you see these woolly fellas walking around. Come August, we would clip this here and we would take it down and wash it. Then we would take the carters, which is these combs that I have here with me. And what we do is, now this would be done with my grandmother, and they would tell the stories. If you were a young lad out looking for a lady, Granny would have the spinning wheel ready, and you would have to do a bit of carting for the rest of the evening before you get anywhere, any dates or anything. So they were flying to, weren't they? Because they were raking houses. A lot of these lived in every house, the spinning wheel. So what I am doing is I'm carting. This is a black sheep and white wool. The wool was taken down, it was washed, and then it was coloured. Now this is black. We start with 3 colours. We have black, which is the black sheep. Now it's very rare to get a black sheep. If you get one, let me know, because it's very lucky to get a pure black. And then we take a little bit of white wool. And now my grandmother would have done this every day. Not only was it connected to the sheep, but it was connected to the landscape. Donegal tweed is just not Donegal tweed. I always say it's the art of history, culture and art, and that's what I'm wearing here, and very proud to wear it. It's made locally, it's done locally. But people will ask me, well, how did you get it? So my grandfather then would go up and they would take the sheep down, they would clip them, and then they would have what we call a sliver of wool. Now the next process is that is a very important process. You have to dye it. And I have a few little coloured dye wool here. It might be hard to see within in the dark. I have some dark colours and some colours made with just orange skins and stuff like that. But my grandmother would go out and take these in, and she would get the colours. Now the colours were very private to every house, so they'd only go, you would have a colour, you would have a colour. You wouldn't tell me what the colour was. That was a safe, it was a house secret. So when it was coloured, the next thing was to make it into a thread. But before that, didn't any of us have tea today? Or coffee? Well, they were all dyes. So you'd have to dye the tweed a certain colour, but then there were herbs left over from them dyes. And that's where my grandmother was a healer. She would have been a long line of healers. So if you came for a wee bit of ointment to get a lump or something cured, she would have it, but that was all taken from nature. So I say we lost that link, just like Keith was saying, the link with the fairies. We lost the link with the mountains, the lakes and the valleys and the wool and the cures. Now some people are back that way. We have a lady over here that has done great research in East, and her dyeing and spinning came here last year and opened up a whole new period of what my grandmother and my great grandmother would have done. Not to keep the story going all night, what we do is card this here. And what do you think the next process after carding would be? Well, we introduce then the spinning wheel, and there's so many songs and stories written about the spinning wheel and around the cottage and around the fire. As I say, this is a traditional Donegal spinning wheel. There's two ways of making a thread. I pass this around. The older way was actually a drop spindle. Now this is just made of one of John Malloy's bobbins. Michael didn't know I took it with me, but I have it here to do a little bit. Drop spindle, and I'll just do a little bit of that for you to show you. And this would date back thousands of years, the drop spindle. And what you do is you just take the thread and you're pulling it away, and it's forming in. Now if you're a shepherd up on the hill of Donegal, you'll be doing this as a pastime to get some done for the evening. So that was making the little thread. Do you want to try that, dear? Try, have a little go. Very lucky to try. And then we have our wool here, and we have our traditional Donegal wheel, which would date back, they say it dates back to the 1600s, but it would have dated back far, far longer than that. These were known as plantation wheels that came in, which people would have grown flax, and they were a wheel given around to every house. But didn't, of course, the Irish noticed that this wheel could spin wool as well. So it was transformed into spinning the wool. So I'm just going to spin a little bit for you. So you could be sitting at the fire spinning, and you'd be telling a story. And of course the stories that I would be listening to would be the Glendowen. And I remember us walking to school, and Daddy would always say, don't look up at the far hill, the Drim. Of course that means we would look up at it. So eventually we got him turned around to ask us, what was the Drim all about? And he says, there was a giant buried there, and it's not good to look up at it because you could be drawn towards it. He says, and I says, was there anyone drawn towards it before, Daddy? And he says, there was. There were two men lived up the road, Packy Huey and Johnny Kitty, and they decided, two brave men, that they were going to dig up where the giant was lying to get the pot of gold. But you had to go out on a Halloween night to get this on a good moonlight night. And when they went out, they were brave men now that a couple of pints or poachings in the town, and they decided they were going to go. And they went up, and they were digging away with the tilly lamp. And what do you think happened? The ground, a welt appeared, and red, like blood, was coming out of it. They got their shovels and spades, and they left. They ran away. They didn't stand to ask any questions. Now it could have been robbery coming out of it, but nobody was going to stand around to make sure that they put their hands behind it. So they got out of it anyway. And after that, there for years and years, there was a hole where that was dug, and people were told to stay away from it. And these are the kind of little stories that we hear growing up around the fire, around the spinning wheel. So that's my little story, folks, the making of a thread.
I wonder if I went around the whole county, would there be a book in it? And there was. And the book now, 2000, came out in 2019, and only for the people of Donegal who picked up that book and bought it in their droves that it gave me the confidence to go back around. Because those 4 years I was going around the county, you're sitting around with a lore-keeper or a storyteller for an hour and a half. Once they told you the story that you were after, sure, the taste still on the table. You know, you're not just going to walk up and leave. And then they started sharing fairy-related phenomena and stories of a more modern time. So by the time I finished the last book, I had 15 stories for the new book. See how one thing leads into the other? So I spoke to the other half, because there was an awful lot of research and driving around in winter nights from district to district and townland to townland, from highways to byways. But fair play to her, she backed me up to the hilt. because she realised that if I'd left it to maybe later years, that a lot of these special lore keepers and storytellers from our county, they would have passed on. Some already did actually during the last 4 years. So I said, now's the time when I hope I'm mature enough to do this well and the energy to carry it out. So this book here is the final book of the series, and I have to say I put 110% into this book, and I can't believe how it turned out. And it's down to the generosity of the stories and the folklore that was shared. And there's such a wide array of themes in it that I do honestly believe, hopefully, that the stories were shared, that they'll be read 50 to 100 years into the future. And as I say, it's not my book, it's came from our county. And I think there's very few places left where this could have been carried out. The Aborigines call this time the Great Forgetting. They're one of the oldest cultures on the planet. We know this. There's so many connections have gone even in the last 2 or 3 generations. But every time brings changes. We have to invent creative ways of to keep this for future generations. And this is one small project that I hope will have helped on that. So as I say, this is a celebration to have got this book over the line. And I thought, as when I was putting together, I was very lucky to get funding from the Arts Council of Ireland, and I said that if I got the book over the line, I would try, now I'm saying try to emulate the bards of old, or the Shanachie, who would travel from district to district, sharing the stories and reconnecting with the people who created and shared these stories. Well, they didn't create them because they're stories that were there. A couple of themes that come through the book. I mean, there's stories in this book that I hope will enchant, others that will entertain. But there are themes in this book, folks, that I think are multi-layered. I think that some of the findings from this book that came across, so a finding that I really wanted to get across, that fairy lore does not belong to a single community. It doesn't even belong just to Irish people. People who could come here for 10 years have found out, and they sense this part of our folklore. It also knows no political or religious lines. When I was collecting stories, particularly in the Finn Valley area, an awful lot of these stories would be collected from Protestant and Presbyterian people who believed as much as anybody else in the fairies' existence. Another theme that came, I believe that, and Jean, who's here tonight, Jean O'Curran, I consider Jean as one of the most special Shanachies we have in the county. And I have to say, and I'm hoping to go back to do an Irish language lessons myself during the winter. It's the Irish language. Our ancestors kept that language alive still in pockets of the county. And that language that Jean has, that store, managed to preserve an awful lot of the older mythology to do with fairy lore, which would have been lost without it. A lovely story that I enjoyed collecting in the Slieve League Peninsula was Tubber Knapastoon, which Jean knows well, yeah. Knapastoon's well. So the story that I did in that was called The Last Fairy Well. And from what Jean shared to me about that every district in Donegal at one time had their own fairy kings and their own fairy queens. And when Jean shared this, as I recount in the story, I just couldn't believe it. He had opened a window on the elder faith that preceded Christianity. They worshipped wells as sacred springs. They had these deities that they named rivers, that they named mountains, that they named hills after. And I thought to myself, what a rich mythology that was that our ancestors managed to keep to present times. And then what I thought was wonderful is this compromise when Christianity came along in Ireland here. We had a kind of a more laissez-faire attitude. So rather than cut down fairy trees, demolish these sacred wells, they said no, they put a new Christian interpretation on it. So rather now being called after a deity like Knappastune or Bidog or Anya, they were called after Columcille or Bridget or Patrick. But I'm sure the ancestors back then would have said, shh, say nothing. We can still go there and do our prayers and worship. You know, so it was a wonderful compromise. So it means in this country we have layer upon layer of meaning. We have the ancient, and we have the not so ancient, and we have the modern, all coexisting together. And just to, you know, people say, you know, well, what is it about these fairies, Keith, that kind of attracted you to spend so long with it? Well, I believe, you know, the Greeks would have said we have logos and we have mythos. The logos, of course, is the root for the word logic. It's to do with science, with rationality, with learning, with medicine, which is very important if anything happens to you. But there's the mythos as well. That's creativity, the spark of creativity, the imagination, playfulness. These are all an understanding of ancestor, of, you know, that we're connected through time to our ancestors in the present. Music, which we have here tonight, music. So the fairies are supposed to love music and storytelling and singing, and what a way to honour them tonight. So I suppose to tie that in, I believe now there's a kind of a push on human beings are almost becoming human doings. It's all about, you know, getting the money, getting the toy, you know, getting the status symbols, buying and doing, but we can't. The human being is made up of two things. They're made up of the logos, and they're made up of the mythos. I believe to be a rounded, balanced human being, you have to have two of those sides residing in yourself. You know, and at Donegal people do that. That's why people come from all over the world. Colin here as a guide as well. People from America, from all over the world, why did they come to Donegal? I'll tell you, it's not for the weather anyway. You know, they come for the people, the culture, the crack, the humour, the quick turn, the wit, our ancestors, the ancestral heritage. Another thing, the fairies protected this. A lot of our ring forts would have been gone long ago, or our fairy rings, or our ancient tombs. People wouldn't touch them. They said there'd be abode of the fairies. This is another good turn that the fairies gave us, to have these protected. Now, geez, I'll tell you, I'm definitely I need a pint now, or at least a sup of one to cool down the pistons a bit. To finish up, in this particular area there were two stories that I was very glad to get. One was Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell was born in Belfast in the late 1800s, and he didn't come from an Irish-speaking area, but he learned Irish. And I suppose when I came across his book on the internet, I found that he was a very idealistic young man. He went away and learned Irish, and he became a teacher for a while in Dublin. He became involved in the Republican movement for our independence over time. But he took a year out, like a lot of people now go to Nepal or the Himalayas or India, which I think is very important for young people to do that, or Australia to go backpacking. And he came not to those places, he came to Donegal. And he essentially became a vagabond, for he talks about sleeping under the stars, and being fed by the people, by walking through areas. People, of course, at the Donegal hospitality, people would have taken him in and fed him. And I suppose they seen that spark in him as well. But he talks about an amazing experience he had in Glenyesh, which is another mystical valley, mountain valley close to here, where he said that he met a leprechaun from Lacoon. He said he was the king of the fairies from the northern half of Ireland. And it's interesting because Sean O'Byrne told me. There's a lake, a mountain loch at the top of that glen called Loch na Lucraman. Loch na Lucraman, of course, means the Lake of the Fairies or the Lake of the Leprechaun. So I included his story because I think it's magical. And Joseph Campbell, for me, was like a mystic who travelled around as a young man, Donegal, and collected a lot. He was a poet at heart as well. You can see that in his writing. So when you buy this book, his book is referenced in the back of it, and you can read it for free online, and it's an amazing book. The second story, and last but not least, what a connection Ardara have. Walt Disney he was very, very much conscious of his Irish connections. I think they were originally from Kilkenny. And he wanted to make the quintessential fairy movie for our time. And he put a lot of work and he put a lot of money into this. And as fate would have it, the screenwriter Lanny Watkins landed in Ardara. And wee Paddy McGill was entrusted to bring him around, but they had no four-wheel drive to do their touring. They went around in bicycles from townland to townland around the area. And isn't it amazing that Jimmy O'Rourke, a tinsmith, I suppose his people were a member of the Travellers in time, but he had a house here in Ardara, and he drank in Tommy Tom's pub, didn't he?
Yep.
Where he played music.
Yep.
And to think that I'm thinking of the golfer, isn't it, Lawrence Watkins, he homed in on Jimmy O'Rourke because he could see the spark in the man. And his column was such a help in the story to say that Jimmy O'Rourke believed that he took a lot of his his tunes from the fairies. And you said, Colin, that his neighbours used to say that when he played the tin fiddle, that it was kind of mystical.
Yeah.
When he played it, And Lawrence Watkins homed in on this.
Yep.
And when he went back to America after visiting Ardara, the height of the fairy Ringford, he rewrote the screenplay to Darby O'Gill. So it's quite possible. I mean, Darby O'Gill was watched. My mother said she watched it in the cinema in Dublin. And I mean, even in the 80s and 90s, we got to see it on TV. And it's a magical movie. Even today, it gives that. So isn't it amazing that probably the most famous movie ever made about the fairies had its origin here, and that Jimmy O'Rourke played such an important part in that story. So folks, to conclude, I'd just like to say, Gura Mila Maigat for Conya and Fodja Morgo Ardara and Nucht. And I hope that I'm bowled over by the support, and what can I say? Let the night continue.
Mick Kennedy, the late Mick Kennedy, told me one night, and he was a great friend of Jimmy O'Rourke's. And Jimmy, of course, lived up on the back road, and he tins and pandies, and he was even had the reputation of making his own fiddle, a tin fiddle. And he had a kind of as you said yourself, a kind of a magical sound out of it, and a mystical sound out of it. But Mick told me the story about Jimmy, that every year he cut his own turf and won them, then he would spread them and he would put them and make clamps out of them and take them on a donkey and cart. And he had his own donkey and cart, and coming up from, it was always Tuddy Clave that he cut, and coming up the Yarn Road at what I would call Walker's Brae, just down where the late Charlie Bennett built the house down there, that would be Walker's Brae, that hill going down towards the O'Neill River, and Jimmy's going up and with the donkey cart and a load of turf on, and everything was going great, and the next thing in the middle of the hill, the donkey stopped. Couldn't get him to move. Right, left, centre, anyway. He didn't know what was wrong. And the next thing he heard the sound. And he looked into Walker's field. The people that owned the field at that time were Walkers. That was their surname. And sitting on a rock over in the field, in the middle of the field, was this little man with a green cap on him, a little green blazer on him, and a fiddle in his hand. And Jimmy looked over at him and he was amazed. And this man started, he was very small, he started to play the fiddle. And Jimmy was amazed at it, the sound that came from it, and the most wonderful tune he ever heard. And he finished it off with a flourish, and just like that, he disappeared. And Jimmy looks around, and there was the donkey on the way up the hill. And he was after it. He got home, and when he got home, he doesn't know, told McKendy, he didn't know what possessed him, but he reached up to the wall for the fiddle, and he took it out, and he played the tune exactly as the fairy had played it. And he called the tune then Walker's Bray. And the tune became very famous, and it was played many's a night in the greenhouse by Jimmy after that. And anybody who heard it were amazed. And that was Jimmy O'Rourke and Little Fairy and Walker's Bray.
Very good.
One more short one. And when I was talking to Veronica Bennett over the Glenties Road that was married to Fonzie Bennett, I was talking to her there one day, and she told me that her father, Paddy Pat, from up in Shasnagrania, that he believed exactly in fairies. There was no doubt in his mind that there were fairies. And he told me that, or Veronica told me that his father told him that he had seen fairies. And he had no experience of them, but he used to go playing cards in the winter time on the neighbour's house about a mile down the road. And there were part of it he had to go through the clearing or the bog, and he knew it like the back of his hand. He was going there every night and back every night, and no problem going up and down. But this night he was coming back from the card playing, and all of a sudden he didn't know where he was. He didn't know how to go left, right, centre, backwards, anything. His whole mind was in a haze, and there was a sort of a mist around him, and he didn't know how to get home. He had no clue, and he started to think, what is happening to me? This must be something to do with the fairies. And he remembered that his father told him, and this would be back, Paddy Pat would be dead now, if he was alive now, he'd be over the 100. So this would be back in the 1920s, maybe early 1930s. He remembered his father told him, when he was a young boy, that if you ever come in contact with what you think of the fairies, if anything ever happens, they will put a spell on you, and you won't get rid of the spell unless you do what I tell you have to do. And he says, take off your jacket, turn it inside out, and put it on again. And he remembered that, and that's what he did. And once Paddy put the jacket back on him again, everything came clear, the mist disappeared, and he walked on home. And he often told his daughter Veronica about that experience that he had, and he believed in the fairies. Thank you very much.
sing it or you're doing your poem now, Keith?
I might as well while I can remember.
And we have another poem coming up, and maybe Kevin would sing a song or two. Or
Charlie.
Or maybe one.
Charlie Sheldon.
Charlie. Yeah, oh Charlie, yeah.
I may have to jeepers, you'll be cursing me before the night's out.
But a half door on.
Well folks, I wasn't really going to do this poem because there's not every space that it translates. But I thought particularly Bart helped how can I say, blaze a trail for me with the two stories that he told. I mentioned Joseph Campbell earlier, and when you read his story about Glengesh, you must realise, I reckon that he probably had a kind of a crossover experience. So I think when he talks about that experience, obviously there's some creative writing in there as well. And it's the same and true with the next story I'm going to tell you. And it's an experience I had around Halloween night in 2005. And I have no doubt that it was a spark which helped create this particular book. Perhaps they were interceding at that time, even though it's 19 years ago since before the book was written. So I'll give it to you as best I can. Coming home from a neighbour's house one night, through a shortcut lit by bright moonlight, what on earth could it be that startled me but two fairies sitting under an old skeg tree? I never would have thought the fairies were real till I watched them play an enchanting reel. My mind jumped back to folk tales of my youth, never thinking my elders were telling the truth. Now fixed to the spot in wondrous surprise, I could scarcely believe it with my own two eyes. It was the time of Ihasauna, or Halloween, when fairy rings open and we folk pass between. Then they gestured me to stay a short while with a courteous nod and a gentle smile. Mesmerised, I accepted with a grateful glance, for it's rare to get accepted to a fairy dance. The fairy queen's eyes were a deep ivy green. Her enchanting gaze was both clear and serene. She wore a shell-embroidered earth green gown. Upon her head a hat made from white swan's down. She plucked a magic harp from silver birch made. Strings of gossamer thread often lit up when played. He played a fiddle made from tough yew, and his mossy beard sparkled in the frosty dew. His eyes were a dark horse chestnut brown, and nestled on his head was an oak leaf crown. Around his shoulders hung a willow bark cloak, on his feet leather brogue preferred by we folk. They played with their backs to a small hilly mound, sheltered by a whitethorn that hung to the ground. Then as quick as a wink they stepped up the pace, how the music flowed easy to this fun-loving race. Sure the owl fairy tree swayed a branch as if pleased, for we folk have always been friends with these trees. And woe to the person who dare sever this link, for they're bound to misfortune, whatever they think. Being too busily engaged with this magic fairy crowd, I scarcely noticed the moon sail behind a dark cloud. When my eyes became accustomed to the darkening night, my hosts had both vanished without trace or sight. Now to all non-believers I say not to worry, for it's impossible to see them if you live in a hurry. And though my strange tale mightn't stand up in court, what I've given you is a genuine eyewitness report. And don't forget William Allingham's The Fairies 200th anniversary next year.
Hunter-gatherers, and at this stage they were on their hunt and landed in a place called Minavean, and there's a townland yet named after them in Minavean. It's to the north side of Slieve. But at the time there was a chief living in the glen. He was called Drowan, and he had a son called Glath. both of them were living in a place that's called Fóhar Girawan. And Fóhar Girawan is still named after them. They were there before Columkill, they were in the Glen. But at this day that the Fianna were in a hunt, Girawan and the son, they hunted their dogs and the Fianna dogs, but the resulted that the Fianna dogs were badly wounded. And the following day, Finn McCool, he banished Girawan's son Glass into exile, never to return again to Ireland. If he did, he would kill him. Years after that, the King of France sent for the Fianna to fight a battle. The King of France, he had the most beautiful daughter in the world, and the King of Greece, his son, wanted to come to France and fight a duel to win the Queen of France, to win his daughter. The Queen of France, he had no warrior to match the son of the King of Greece. And he had to come to the Fianna warriors, and they went to France and they fought all the warriors that came from Greece. When the battle was over, the King of France, his daughter, came to Ireland with Finn's gilla, which was called Creel. The King of France's wife, she got lonely and she was interested in Finn, and she left the king and she came to live in Ireland with Finn. The King of France, he was bitterly sorry, and he at the same time he had a lot of respect into Finn. But the result that he sent for the King of the world, which was known that had done, and he put his army together with the army of France, and they got the man that Finn banished from Glen years before that, which was Glass. Glass showed them the way to come to Ireland, and they fought a mighty battle. It's a very long story, but they fought a very long battle. And Fintra, the battle was supposed to have lasted for a year and a day. And on the last days of the battle, when they were all killed, was one survivor, and that was of the strangers, the army of the King of the world and the army of the Francis army. They were all wiped out. There wasn't one living. And the only person that was one of them that came on the fleet that day was Glass, the same man that Finn had banished years before that. And he was watching the fight all them times behind the ditches and behind the rocks. And he tried to escape by swimming out in his skiff. Finn saw this, and Finn shouted to his gilla, which was called Creel Classa. He followed him out to the island. And when he came as far as the island, he got a house for him, and he choked them dry on the edge of the shore. And so he choked them dry on the edge of the shore. Glass got a hold of them, and they fell into the water. And with the result that the two of them drowned together. And there's Alawan, which was married to Creel Classa. She was watching this, and she spent 8 days and 8 nights walking over and back the edge of the shore. And she was bitterly sorry. She composed a song, and in that song it gives us an idea of the respect that the people had in the time for their land, the sea, the wild animals and the birds. And it's probably one of the oldest Irish poems that has survived. My grandfather had it, and for the sad part of it, there's a lot of it lost. It's in the very old Irish, and this is how it goes. Buan Cuan, o Buan Cuan, fa Eire Chrada Rinda Barach, o Bahu Liach a Hum, as a Genius Tum a Duncy Tra, a Spinning Hoy, o Spinning Hoy, a Hasty and Drumlach a Green. We fidget here a howl a Howard Slan. tan cwd a gaha ddim o wal. Egnech lenwr o egnech lenwr, yn is yn small yn rym chyn. Ni hasti e, yn I rednach e, yn is yn lom y lecher o fi. Gemnech lenwr o gemnech lenwr, yn is yn daw yn rym galas. Sy'n marw ar chrach yn chalan, tan nylid og, gemnech daw, Gilum yn a jay. Dogran ger, ys ger yn dogran. Bas yn lwych o liw lym. Mic na mra, ys dei da gas. Efa fa chosh, ys y chwygyn chyn. Dogran ger, sy'n dws y cyl. Efa sy'n chymarw lym o hiw. Gyr un tom, har a chorp as a chym. Ys fari mei, meid mo Eve. Ys lenwr glwm, o ys lenwr glwm. Yn is yn tom trym yn nimel tra. O wai sy'n ffarp, y fi sir gan fras. Bronach me, cwl, ddod yn y dal. Ys lenwr tŵam, o ys lenwr tŵam. Yn is yn tom trym ar y trai o chwai. Ei cragw yn ein agaret a slachta. Ei cynw cyl ta amau ha wiam. Tred lenwr, ys lenwr tred. Yn is yn tom trym ar y trai o jas. Mysio o wal mo reis a katsia. Ys mas mo I re de war na frasa. Fon lenwr, ys lenwr fom. Yn is yn tom trym. Tallach leis. Dwse a tasgriste igen leersjes. I rach an a ries. O bai ho kiel. Ansach me chrie. No grase ni lach na je. Na ga me tra. A het no wau. A hier gus as ga. Wa na. We shouldn't choose the still kach.
The Ardara forward and started on the wing. Young Charlie, he was flagman and John was at the wing. The noise she made would raise the dead was heard for miles around, and the grinding of that engine sure it fairly shook the town. We got as far as Wenstown when she began to boil. You wouldn't have seen us in the smoke when we reached Barney Coils. She was shooting like a Lewis gun and the rain began to teem. You wouldn't have known if we did go by petrol or by steam. Going up the hill at Letcher Brick, sure something give a crack. We soon discovered that it was a spring gun at the back. We squared it up to start again when Charlie he looked out. Oh, the two front wheels were on the rim and then the lights went out. We got as far as Glenties, we had got some abuse. The brakes they weren't working and the steering wheel was loose. The petrol cap was leaking and the valves were all burned out. And our poor old radiator, it was running like a spout. We got as far as Ardara, the night was wearing on. A lot already shouted out a Merry Christmas, John. And we forgot our troubles and treated them as a joke, till going halfways up the street the driving shaft had broken. Now friends, don't be laughing, for if you'd been in her shoes, if you'd Father Matthew's medal it would start you on the booze, 'cause there's not a bloomin' garage that she's been in for repair, and if her maker is in heaven now, it isn't through my prayer. Fare thee well, the old Gariford, I'm bidding you goodbye, and the next man to drive you, sure I wish him the best of joy. For when you're scrapped in Dublin, I often will recall all the days and nights I spent with you in the wilds of Donegal.
Agus Tarsa go bhfuil an nóir seo bunaithe ar sciil siaga agus agus ápa Oslo Manchester Horshe Ma'ach Institution agus Cancer agus Cancer Mashanwami Ostrauchter Naglanti agus Mina Wanya Achar agus I written scene near Hahan Rendon they won agus a Kershi Brew and Dag Bogo Mahas Menora agus Furdan was the American Leagues. Just to say, my mother married at Rendon 81 years old and she didn't like it. And it was a weaving community, a traditional Gaelic weaving community where my grandfather and the sons were a traditional weaving family using cotton for dyes. And I remember one time my mother told me a story that she was taking the potatoes off the crook and carrying the potatoes down the house to the front door to drain it outside. And there was a child in the house with four wheels and it came running up the floor and my mother couldn't run because she was scolding the child and the child hit her on the shoulders and cut her. And like they had no money to be going to Ardara or go to the doctor. So what my grandfather thought, he went up, my mother was, he went up the hill and he got a plant called Glockamossy, whatever that means. That's what my mother said. He got Glockamossy up on the grey face and he chewed it and made it and put it on my mother's shins and it ate up great. But my mother didn't like it and that's why I was born in Donegal because Daddy got a job in Donegal and he always taught me he loved to be coming to Ardara with my mother because he would always come back and he would those extortions. So that was the family. That was a family. So that was it. But when I said you come to shop in the ball and I have a certificate for flattening and spreading and carrying Mars.
I'm about man.
But in fact, I had been shown no, there are the Misha, I fast I go on the man who's daddy and she's August. Shaw skill, Dana Wan, I was in Tanima to air, I was Mammy's fairy tales, the skill to fishiga a Janish Mawami do. So Mammy, they were always talking about how she would tell me about fairies and things like that. Because my mother actually believed in fairies. My mother saw a fairy, and the first verse of the poem refers to this concept. And you see the concept, I'm not going to go into it now, but the concept of the sacredness of place is really central to Celtic Gaelic life, where every tree, every living form was a manifestation of the sacred reality. That's the basis of Shield. This is anyway for Keith and for, I'm so delighted to be in Ardara and not have to go to the ball. So, Shaw, Jan Finney, Versa Awan Gaelic, Oxygen Versa Wani Berlin, sorry, Shaw, she skilled the Mawami, my mother's fairy tales. Okay. Honig Mawami, a shield fame, August Dol Susan Aula, Edder Kasha Bulgara, August Ardahi, Bag August Rua, August Rihanon, in Acadation Al, Sativ Ukter del Far, Fukunya second one, Nashiga Vion Kincha, Kajay, Ella. That is exactly what my mother said in English. Going up the Alt between Castlelogry and Ardara was where mammy saw her fairy. This is quotes. Red-headed and small, running along the hedge at the upper end of the field, just for a second. It must have been the fairies. What else could it have been? Hug na Shiega and Lena Edi, the Hia Shanwahar Vikin Archen, maar Therese Chat and Shieg, near Crochel Clan Sigrid, een Edi Flo, een Sprog. Tronora Wan, Nunaro Akmawami agus Dole, a Yahar, a Shinnis a Chat, a still Mami, Leshan Shiakan, came far a road to a Caillou, Scrachany Oram, a Diffrishi. Ní Misha Viana a Wami Ursidone. Near Croco Ian Yachan Erin, Tarpon and Drying Ball Vasta, Currow Sush, Lena Edi, Nashiga Viana Kincha, Kajay Ella a Viana. It was the fairies who brought the clothes to Granny McNairn's house, for they ended the wet clothes hanging on the shrub. One evening when Mammy and her eldest brother Daniel were in the house and Granny returned with the washing. Daniel, why were you throwing clods at me? She asked. It wasn't me, Mammy. And no washing hung on the clump of blackthorn sticks from then on. A clothesline was put up. It must have been the fairies. What else could it have been? Ihe wani mina vradan, hug na Shiega Kurch, Marachan Kitty. Hanik ban vergistja, Jiel ni tijin the hill, a sea of Kurti bal in the moon. Cheersi wala, Gana veha Kayo Eske a massa darkagus, Teresh na Sahi and Yi. Cén fá sin na ceistí mara, mar bhíonn tú a caitheamh RNA na Shiega a bhí an cinse, Kajay Ella a bhí an. The fairies called on Mary Johnny Kitty one evening in Mina Braddon. At night falling, a wee woman came in, looking for a bowl of meal. She asked Mary not to throw out the water at night after you wash the dishes. Why not? Asked Mary Johnny Kitty. Because you were throwing it on top of us. It must have been the fairies. What else could it have been? Bhí na Shiega I Glendon fasta. Cosol leis an sneachta a lí fada frí na leichanta givri. Sleabhain a bhí an cosan isteach go minic agus scéir wachar sean óin an leach air. At near hit she. Nur a hanig ban bug hagan chat icha a sea crowt the bar on the minia, dragar she nur a kestu e. Cain fa ba kertu runch mina a horch ditch. Misha a howl tuno nihishin, a hitch to an invalak a stahawada, the Shiega a vion kincher, Kajay Ella a viason. The fairies were in Glendon too, as was the snow, which lay long for many a winter's day. The Cassie Inn was often slipping, and once Johnny Huey's mother slipped on the ice but did not fall. Later, when a wee woman called, looking for a bowl of meal, she replied when asked, "Why should I give some to you?" And she said, "'Twas me who saved you that night you fell on the way home. It must have been the fairies. What else could it have been?" Just here for
from Glendon. You heard I said earlier on there might be a few tales from Glendon, so a great place to visit. Now, Keith, will the band play, or Michelle, you want to give a wee rumble tumble and roll? In the morning, before the fairies get up.
says about 80% of it is new material. Because as I said, if I was going to spend 4 years at this, I was hoping to make some contribution to the folklore collection. But there's about 20%, maybe 15%, that stories that I came across that I felt deserved a renewal for future generations as well. And one of the stories I came upon in one of the books that I read, I mean everything by the way is referenced, and anybody who collected it, was to do with Packy Manus Byrne. You know, I mean sure look, the man was a legend, and I wish that I had met him, but I never got a chance to meet him. But I heard a lot about him. And he was a great character, you know. He was just a very educated, talented individual. And I thought it was kind of ironic in a way, because he had a great book out called Recollections of a Donegal Man. I mean, powerful history, but not only local history of Donegal, social history of England where he was, and the social history of Ireland. But I wouldn't say he's too far away tonight with the great music and the storytelling, you know. But the irony is, he didn't believe in the fairies, but I think that he felt that it was still an important part of the culture. And if he didn't believe in them, other family members big time did, because he collected family stories. There's one lovely story. It's actually the final story in the collection. So I started in Bundoran and Ballyshannon, and I would have went clockwise around the counties. So, thanks, Mike. Thanks, So I finished in Barnesmore Gap with this particular story, because Packy said that the story itself was based in the Barnesmore Mountains, and it's a very, very moving story. I would say it's at least 200 years old, and there's a very, as Packy Manus says at the beginning of the story, there's a very powerful fable in that story, you know, because it tells of a very poor shepherd's family and they only one child, and so the child was on death's door, and they were distraught because they weren't doing very well. And it was actually interjection, they believe, from the fairies at the time, that a fairy woman came to the door and she had a child in her hands, and he was out in the hills. There was a blizzard of snow at the time, and he was bringing neighbours' sheep back down to the lowlands again. And while he was away, their wee daughter passed away, right? And this wee woman came to the door, and you can imagine how distraught the woman at the house was, and she was cradling a wee baby, and she said, come in out of the snow, you know, and she said, you can have the wee bit of milk that I have because my own daughter's passed away. And the woman accepted the milk, and she says, you don't have to worry, she said, because your child's going to be okay. And she disappeared back into the snowdrift, to the blizzard. But as she was leaving the cottage, her husband was coming back down after penning the sheep, and he couldn't see anything because the visibility was so bad with the snow, but he started to hear this woman singing. And I suppose as he kept on hearing this melody that she was singing, he kind of became entranced by it. He kind of went into a trance, and he came back to the cottage, and their wee child was in a cradle next to the fire, just in front of the fire, and I'm sure the wife was distraught, but he walked past her as in a trance, and he picked down the fiddle, and he began to play the melody that he heard this strange woman, you know, that he heard in the blizzard, and he kept on playing the song, and as he played the song, he became, as Packy describes, he became part of the song. It just took him in, and the next minute, the scream of his wife took him out of it, and their wee baby girl had been revived. And that wee girl was said to have grown up to be an extremely talented, beautiful young woman. And Packy always said that even though he didn't believe in the fairies, he said there was a very powerful fable in that, you know, of generosity, even in the time of great crisis for that family. And so he collected that story from his granduncle called Big Pat Byrne, and there was also a tune to go with that as well. And the name of the story was Soon Clock Chinya, or the Firestone Lullaby. Now, Packy, being a Shanachie that he was, I didn't know what a clock chinya was, and I found out that in cottages years ago, the floors were made of mud, of compact mud, not flagstones. And over time, can you imagine all the people coming in and out of them cottages? It was compact, and if it got wet, because imagine there'd be boiling potatoes on the open fire, and if anything spilled out onto it would be like ice, you know, it'd be like a sheet of ice. But in those houses, they always put a whinstone. You know what a whinstone is? Kind of like a grainy stone, and that was always placed in front of the fire, so that if there was children or wee toddlers running around, that they wouldn't slip on the, you know, the water on the floor. So that was called a clock chinya. So he called Big Pat, he had collected this old mystical fiddle tune, and it was called Soon Clock Chinya, or the Firestone Lullaby. So that's the last story in the collection. But you know, I'm not going to tell you that story, but I'm going to tell you, and this is in honour now of Packy Manasburn, because anybody who knew him knew that he was a great wit. So what I'd like to tell you is a yarn from a storyteller who was from the southern foothills of the Bluestack Mountains, and his name was James Macaulay. And he was a bachelor sheep farmer, and I actually got to meet, he had never had any children, but I got to meet his relations. They were home from Australia, and they told me that they used to stay with him, kind of like Joseph when he was younger, and they would go collecting, you know, doing the turf in Ardara. They said that he was like St. Francis of Assisi, because when he would always make a scone of bread for himself at night time, and they'd have that for breakfast. And whatever crumbs, you know, were created when he was cutting up the scone in the morning time, he would bring it out to the birds. He had a wee bird table outside the cottage. But sure, the birds were so used to him now, they thought this was amazing. As he'd be walking out with it, the birds would be lighting, you know, the robins and the wrens, and they wouldn't wait until he put the crumbs on the table. So this was the kind of character James Macaulay was, but he was a great storyteller. And the RTE came to his house one time and actually collected. And this is one of James's most famous stories, and it's called, jeepers, I'll tell you, hold on, The Last Robin. It's called Man Keeps Dead Wife. Once upon a time, Seamus was out walking near his own home cottage, when who should he meet walking up the road towards him but the local parish priest. "Seamus," says the priest. "Father, how are you?" "Seamus, I was very sorry to hear about the passing of your good wife, but could you tell me, was she buried in her native place?" "Well," says Seamus, "as a matter of fact, Father, she's not buried yet." "But Seamus," says the priest, "I'm given to take that your wife died last Thursday, and this is Tuesday, and you know fair well she should be buried at least 2 days ago by now." "Well," says Seamus, "I'll put it to you like this, Father. My wife died last Thursday, and you and me are going to bury her this Thursday." "But Seamus," says the priest, "you can't do that." "I can, and I will, Father," says Seamus, "for when we got married, we promised each other one quiet week together, and this is going to be it."
I'm Scottish and moved to Ardara, and we met Packy just not long after we moved here and became good friends with him. And he has a million stories and songs and things, and I'm also lucky to have a collection of all of his songs that he was trying to gather together. And we were all trying to learn some of them so that we could keep the songs going. And this was the song that Packy wanted me to learn to sing. And it's very appropriate because it's about Narren Strand. It's called Lovely Narren Strand, and those of you who've been around here will know that it's a lovely beach just a few miles away down the road. So it's yeah, it's one of Packy's finest. Anyway, I'll go back home.
few thank yous. You know, this didn't happen by just the fairies alone. There was a bit of organising it, you know, and when particularly myself and Colin are fellow tour guides, and we met through the excursion the cruise ships that come into Killybegs, and I tell you, any cruise ship tour that land in Killybegs and get Colin as their guide are very, very lucky visitors, because he's so steeped in the culture and the history. He lives and breathes it, you know, and that's the truth. And I thought to myself, if Colin can get away with wearing a tweed vest, I'm going to as well. He started that. I'd also like, you know, to thank Michael as well. Michael Malloy is so supportive. When I brought tours around during the summer there, sure, one of the highlights of their time here was visiting Michael's shop and Colin doing the weaving demonstration for him as well, so it was great. And also, once Colin got behind it, and then we approached Stephen here, I never actually got chatting to Stephen, but I've always met him. Not met him, but seen him in the newspaper, and it was always for the good reasons. Because growing up in my area, I was inspired by Stephen, because every second week he'd be doing cleanups, litter cleanups of the town. He'd be involved in fundraising, you know, and you could see he's a community leader. And you need community leaders like that, because they help inspire hopefully the next generation as well.
Pretty well.
So thanks for the points here tonight. I couldn't think of a nicer venue, to be honest with you, to have this Ceilidh tonight. So I don't know. All I can say is I've got plenty ink now here for the quill. You got reloaded there. So if anybody would like to buy a book, I don't know. Do you just want to finish it now?
Well, as Connie Malloy used to say, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Fair enough.
Thanks very much.
So thanks a million, Stephen, and thanks, Colin. Thank you all for coming out tonight.